Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into something darker than a Roman dungeon, smellier than a gladiator's armpit, and more terrifying than a toga party gone wrong. That's right, we're talking about sickness and death Roman style. A time when your doctor might have been a philosopher, your medicine was probably wine with a side of lead, and if something itched, the recommended solution was, don't worry, you're probably just cursed. But before you get too cozy under your hygienically superior 21st century blanket, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to deeply unsettling, historically accurate nonsense. Drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from and what absurd hour it is where you are, because let's be honest, it's always 2:47 a.m. somewhere. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soothing white noise, and sink back into your pillows. Maybe double check that your bedroom doesn't smell like vinegar and goat. Just in case. Let's pause for a second. Ever wondered how Romans handled illness without antibiotics, hand sanitizer, or the concept of germs? Did they really believe fevers were caused by an imbalance of invisible liquids? What happened when you sneezed in the forum? Were you blessed, arrested, or offered a goat? How did ancient doctors treat migraines without Advil or empathy? And when things got serious, what exactly happened to your body after you died in ancient Rome? Were you buried with honor? Or dumped in a ditch with the neighborhood stray cat? Could you survive a Roman surgery, using tools that look suspiciously like barbecue skewers? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 164 CE midway through the Antonine Plague. You're sweaty, confused, and your neighbor is loudly coughing something that sounds like Latin for oops. The streets are packed, the temples are crowded, and the gods aren't answering their mail. Welcome to Roman sickness and death. Let's get you checked in. You enter the domus of your neighborhood medicus, who greets you with a reassuring smile and hands that haven't seen soap since Nero. His robe is stained with something suspiciously red, and his surgical kit looks like it belongs in a horror museum. He doesn't so much diagnose you as interpret your soul's energy imbalance, then prescribes boiled mouse wine. You're in safe hands. Allegedly, the medicus that's Roman for guy with a beard and a lot of confidence has been trained in the ancient art of doing what Galen would have done, but with less supervision. He's not just a doctor. He's a philosopher, a part-time astrologer. And if you ask about your rash, an enthusiastic guesser. His toolkit includes bronze tweezers, a scalpel that looks like it came from a blacksmith's reject pile, and something he calls a speculum, which you sincerely hope is never relevant to your life. You sit on a stone bench, which is either an exam table or a dining seat. It's never clear, and try to explain your symptoms in between sneezes. He nods solemnly, strokes his beard, and mutters something about imbalanced humors. Specifically, your phlegm is jealous of your black bile, and until they sort out their differences, your lungs will continue trying to evacuate your soul. He listens to your heartbeat by placing his ear vaguely near your chest, then pulls out a scroll to double-check what Aristotle said about fevers. It turns out, if you're too hot, you need something cold. Ground oyster shell mixed with vinegar, perhaps? Or maybe a nice bath in wine and crushed poppy seeds. You ask if it's dangerous. He shrugs in a way that implies, only if you care about waking up. Roman doctors believed firmly in the power of opposites. If you were sluggish and cold, you needed hot and dry. If you were hot and wet, time to dry you out like old fruit. Your entire body, in their expert opinion, was a bubbling stew of fluids: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. And every ache or cough was just the soup acting up. The solution was rarely rest and fluids. It was usually more dramatic, and frequently involved sharp objects. He rummages through a clay jar and pulls out a dried mouse, crushed herbs, and a very ambitious-looking ladle. It's time for your medicine. Boiled mouse wine, gently heated over a brazier that also smells like old sandals and disappointment. You ask what the mouse is for. He answers, vitality. You ask what the wine is for. He answers, courage. You ask what happens if you drink it. He answers, I'll light a candle just in case. Treatment complete. He now turns to preventive care. That means writing you a charm on a scrap of parchment and advising you to sleep with it under your pillow, next to a small statue of Asclepius. The statue has one eye, a faint moustache, and smells faintly of incense and mildew. You're told it has healing powers. You suspect it has tetanus. You try asking about hygiene. He looks confused. You explain that people in the future wash their hands. He laughs for a full minute. Wash hands? Why would I insult the gods of healing by rinsing away their divine work? You realize too late that the red on his robe might not be wine. He recommends a mild bloodletting just to clear the channels. You decline politely? He shrugs again, disappointed but not offended. After all, some people are too stubborn to embrace the miracle of arterial release. He offers you an alternative. A poultice made of goose fat, crushed myrtle berries, and a prayer whispered into a fig leaf. You nod. This feels safer. Before you leave, he checks your tongue, your pulse, and your aura, none of which he truly understands, but it makes him feel thorough. He records his findings by drawing a small, angry chicken on a wax tablet. This apparently means likely to recover. You feel strangely comforted. On your way out, you pass the next patient, a soldier, with an arrow in his leg, and an expression of cautious optimism. The medicus looks at him, sighs dramatically, and starts heating up the tongs. You hear the words, biting stick, and hope for the best. You keep walking. As you exit into the dusty Roman street, you realize that surviving illness here isn't just a matter of luck. It's a matter of having a high pain tolerance, a good relationship with your gods, and a stomach strong enough to survive boiled rodent in a bottle of plonk. The medicus may not cure your body, but he does something else. He makes you believe, for one brief moment, that maybe you're not dying, maybe you're just transitioning into wisdom, or at least into mildly fermented peace. And really, what more could you ask for in a world where your medical chart is just a chicken drawing and a confident shrug? According to Roman medicine, you're not sick, you're just tragically unbalanced. Literally. Your body is an unstable cocktail of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Your job? Keep them balanced. The method? Mostly guesswork, occasional leeches, and a firm belief that sneezing too often means your spleen is throwing a tantrum. Welcome to the world of humoral theory, where every sniffle, twitch, or sudden desire to punch your neighbor can be explained by one of 4 ancient fluids having a bad day. You don't have a cold. You have too much phlegm. You're not cranky, you've just got excessive yellow bile, obviously. And if you're feeling melancholy, well, that's not depression. It's an abundance of black bile, probably from eating sad grapes or standing too close to a moody statue. The Romans inherited this delightful theory from the Greeks, mostly Hippocrates and later Galen, who both agreed the human body is basically a leaking vat of soup, and your job is to make sure the soup doesn't curdle. And if it does, well, time to drain the pot. Literally. Each humor was thought to correspond to a season, an organ, a personality trait, and probably your favorite type of cheese. Blood was hot and wet, associated with spring, the liver, and people who talk too much. Phlegm was cold and wet winter, the brain, and people who couldn't be bothered to do laundry. Yellow bile was hot and dry summer, the gallbladder, and that one cousin who always picks fights at dinner. And black bile? Cold and dry autumn, the spleen, and poetry majors. Feeling anxious and twitchy? That's an excess of yellow bile. Feeling sluggish and emotionally unavailable? You're phlegmatic. Have you been weeping into your lentils while staring into the middle distance? That's classic black bile. Or maybe you just need a nap and some protein, but don't say that out loud. It wasn't invented yet. Treatment was, let's say, enthusiastic. If your humors were out of balance, the goal was to bring them back in line by any means necessary, which usually meant purging, sometimes up, sometimes down, and sometimes both. One popular method was emetics herbal concoctions designed to make you vomit, ideally in a decorative bowl. If you were lucky, it was just crushed herbs in wine. If you were unlucky, it was boiled cabbage, sheep dung, and a heartfelt prayer. Another crowd favorite? bloodletting. Nothing quite says healing like being drained of a pint of your personality. The medicus would tie a leather strap around your arm, whip out his favorite blade, sometimes shaped like a fish for extra drama, and open a vein. You'd lie back, breathe deeply, and try not to pass out before he reached the designated volume. If you fainted, that was just proof it was working. Leeches were also popular, not because they were effective, but because they were available. You'd lie on a slab while slimy little bloodsuckers latched onto your skin, doing what they do best, being gross and mildly symbolic. They were especially beloved for delicate patients, women, poets, or anyone with a tendency to faint near strong smells. If you were lucky, your doctor might try dietary balancing instead. Too much black bile? Eat warming foods like roasted meat and red wine. Too much phlegm? Time for hot mustard, lentils, and vigorous jogging. This was before anyone had invented calories or joy, so healing foods often tasted like regret sprinkled with goat hair. Still, better than another leech. For personality imbalances, the advice got more philosophical. Melancholic types were advised to spend more time in the sun, listening to cheerful flute music and avoiding poetry. Choleric folks were told to avoid spicy food and take up hobbies like gardening, where their aggression could be productively redirected toward weeds. Phlegmatic people were just encouraged to wake up once in a while. And sanguine types, those carefree, happy-go-lucky chatterboxes, were politely asked to please stop talking for 5 minutes, so everyone else could die in peace. Of course, no one actually saw the humours. You couldn't measure them, weigh them, or hold them in a jar. But that didn't stop every Roman doctor from confidently stating, "Ah, yes, clearly too much yellow bile," while pointing at a patient who had simply stubbed their toe. It was less about evidence and more about vibes. The humours were the astrology of ancient medicine. Unprovable, deeply personal, and weirdly convincing after 2 glasses of wine. Despite the utter lack of scientific basis, the theory of the humours dominated medical thought for over 1,000 years. 1,000. That's a millennium of people being purged, bled, leeched, and cabbage-wrapped because someone in a toga once got moody and blamed it on their liver. And yet, there's something oddly comforting about it. In a world with no antibiotics, no x-rays, and no idea what a germ is, the humours offered structure, logic, and a weird sort of poetic balance. You weren't just sick, you were imbalanced. The goal wasn't just to cure the body, it was to restore harmony between fluids that no one could actually prove existed. It was healthcare by metaphor, and sometimes that was enough. So the next time you feel a little off, don't reach for your vitamins. Reach for your inner Roman. Light a candle, sacrifice a chicken, and ask yourself, am I hot and dry, cold and wet, or just fundamentally over this century? Either way, you're probably fine. Unless your spleen is acting up again, in which case, leeches it is. The Roman elite loved their baths, their feasts, and their strategic purging. If your stomach was upset, the solution wasn't rest, it was to lean in. Feeling queasy? Perfect. Go throw up in a marble basin and brag about it later. Vomiting was so common, they built special rooms for it, because nothing says civilization like decorative bath buckets. Welcome to the vomitorium. No, not the exit of a stadium that's a modern architectural misunderstanding. In its most elite and luxurious form, the Roman vomitorium was less of a hallway and more of a lifestyle choice. And while it may not have been an officially designated throw-up chamber, many wealthy Romans certainly acted like it was. You ate, you vomited, and then you guessed it, you went back for more. Because why limit yourself to 1 7-course meal when you could enjoy 2 with a mid-dinner reset? Picture it. You're reclining on a plush couch, draped in layers of fine linen, surrounded by figs, honey cakes, roasted dormice, and a suspiciously large pile of oysters. Your host insists you try the flamingo tongues, so you do. Twice. The wine is flowing, your belt is loosening, and the harpist in the corner is playing something that sounds like gentle encouragement to empty your digestive sins and make room for more lark's tongues in jelly. You start to feel full, too full. Modern instinct might tell you to take a walk, maybe lie down, or sip some tea. Roman instinct? Step behind the curtain and expel your indulgence with the same level of enthusiasm you applied to eating it. No shame, no hesitation, just a perfectly normal part of the evening. Like clinking wine goblets or complimenting the mosaic floor. The process wasn't exactly subtle. Elite Romans sometimes brought their own feather to tickle the back of their throat, sort of an ancient organic spoonful of ipecac. Others relied on sheer technique, practiced gag reflexes and posture learned from years of excessive banquet attendance. If you had a good purge, you might even get a nod of respect from the host. After all, the whole evening is a performance. You're here to impress, and nothing says wealth and status like being able to afford an endless feast and a second stomach. And lest you think this was just about indulgence, remember, this was also medical. Sort of. Roman physicians believed that vomiting, voluntary or otherwise, helped cleanse the body of impurities. Had a rough night? Too much wine? Ate a date that tasted a little? Weird. Don't rest. Don't hydrate. Just stick your head in the basin and start your wellness journey the Roman way. These basins, by the way, were not hidden. They were beautifully crafted, strategically placed, and sometimes even perfumed. Decorative bowls for decorative suffering. And if you weren't up for a full purge, you could simply lean over your dinner tray and let nature take its course. The servants were used to it. They'd seen worse. They were trained to quietly whisk away the evidence while you reached for more honeyed snails. And no, this wasn't everyone. The average Roman citizen didn't have the luxury of purging their meal to make room for seconds. They were busy stretching barley soup into Tuesday and hoping their bread didn't break a tooth. But among the elite, this was standard operating procedure. Strategic vomiting was a sign of status. The poor ate to survive. The rich ate to display. This created a very strange relationship with food. Banquets became competitive events. Who could eat the rarest delicacies? Who could last the longest without untying their belt? Who could purge discreetly and return with enough charm to keep the conversation flowing about Greek philosophy, or which senator was most definitely cheating on his fourth wife? To decline food was suspicious. To say "I'm full" was almost rude. But to purge and continue eating? That was civilized, refined, cultured, possibly insane, but still very Roman. Even the philosopher Seneca, stoic, restrained, kind of the Roman version of your friend who only drinks hot lemon water, was disgusted by it. He wrote scathingly about nobles who vomited so they could eat more and ate so they could vomit again. He called it gluttony as performance art, though probably in Latin and with slightly more passive-aggressive gravitas. Eventually, as with all things Roman, the habit fell out of fashion. Vomiting at dinner parties went from being chic to being, well, frowned upon. But for a good stretch of time, this was the vibe. Opulence, excess, and the idea that food was something to be conquered, not merely enjoyed. So if you ever feel bad about finishing a family-sized bag of chips, just remember at least you didn't follow it up with a decorative marble basin and a personal feather stick. That's progress. That's growth. That's digestion. Because in ancient Rome, fullness wasn't a signal to stop eating. It was merely a polite intermission. One grand gut-emptying pause before Act 2 of a never-ending buffet. When medicine failed, and it usually did, you could always turn to the gods. You stagger into the temple of Asclepius, the Roman god of healing, where priests interpret your dreams and sacred snakes slither freely across the floor. You're told to sleep on a stone bench, fast for 3 days, and hope the divine shows up in your dreams, or doesn't. The temple is less of a hospital and more of a cross between a spa retreat, a religious experience, and a reptile house with delusions of grandeur. Located just outside the noise and sewage of the city, the sanctuary of Asclepius is meant to be peaceful and pure, and in some ways it is. There are gentle breezes, chirping birds, and the constant, slithering reminder that somewhere beneath your bed is a snake with impeccable divine credentials. Before you're even allowed to lie down, a priest wearing robes whiter than your expectations of recovery approaches you. He asks detailed questions about your symptoms, then immediately ignores them and begins asking about your dreams, recent sins, and whether you've angered any celestial beings by sneezing incorrectly. You nod along. You're not entirely sure if you're being diagnosed or interviewed for a cult. Either way, it's too late to back out now. Asclepius, the god in question, was once a mortal healer so good at his job that he started raising people from the dead. Naturally, this annoyed the gods because immortality is a members-only perk, and Zeus, being the diplomatic negotiator that he was, responded by striking him with a thunderbolt. But no hard feelings. Asclepius was deified posthumously and now works in the afterlife as a freelance miracle dispenser. His temples are all-inclusive spiritual hospitals with excellent snake-to-human ratios. The healing process is called incubatio, and it's exactly as restful as it sounds. You're led into a sleeping chamber, stone walls, modest torchlight, and more lizards than pillows. The floor is cold. The air smells faintly of myrrh, and faintly of something that might be old goat. You're told not to speak, not to eat, and definitely not to swat at the sacred snakes, no matter how unsettling they get. They're holy. You are not. You lie on a slab that makes your back contemplate rebellion, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the gentle sfaft of snake scales moving across mosaic tiles. This is where the magic happens. Or it doesn't. The idea is that while you sleep on an empty stomach, surrounded by incense and writhing reptiles, the god Asclepius might visit you in a dream and diagnose your illness. He might whisper a cure into your ear. He might also appear in the form of a snake and coil around your leg. Either way, you're supposed to be grateful. Dreams here are not just dreams. They are divine consultations. If you dream of a dog licking your wound, the priest might interpret this as a sign to apply honey. If you dream of flying over the sea, it might mean you need more fish in your diet. If you dream that your uncle turns into a goat and kicks you in the stomach, you might be prescribed a warm bath and a strong emotional purge. The interpretations are flexible and heavily reliant on your storytelling skills. In the morning, assuming you weren't accidentally strangled by a sacred snake or crushed by a passing donkey in your dreamscape, the priests gather around to hear your vision. They nod solemnly, stroke their beards, if available, and consult a scroll written by someone who once had a dream about olives and never had a cold again. Based on this, you are given a divine prescription. It might include a pilgrimage, an herbal poultice, a change in lifestyle, or for more persistent symptoms, a stern warning to stop lying to your wife. For the truly lucky, Asclepius himself appears in the dream and performs spiritual surgery. He might open your chest, fix your spleen, and then tuck you in like a celestial surgeon with excellent bedside manner. When you awaken, you feel slightly confused, deeply hungry, and maybe just a bit less itchy. Whether that's divine healing or the result of lying still and quiet for 12 hours, while snakes performed what can only be described as interpretive dance, who knows? Outside, other patients roam the temple grounds. Some claim miraculous recovery. Others are still waiting for their dream to load. Everyone, however, agrees that the priests have excellent handwriting and the snakes are mostly polite. Offerings are left at the altar: coins, garlands, clay figures shaped like body parts. If your liver is hurting, you leave a little liver. If your foot aches, you leave a tiny terracotta foot. It's like an Etsy store for the divine. As you prepare to leave, a priest blesses you with a sprig of something that might be bay leaf or might be last week's soup garnish. You are declared cleansed. Though no one asks how your rash is doing, you feel strangely refreshed, slightly sleep-deprived, and spiritually snake adjacent. You walk away into the rising sun, unsure if you were healed, hypnotized, or simply well-rested for the first time in weeks. Because sometimes, in a world without antibiotics, all you really needed was a nap, a dream, and a snake with good intentions. Congratulations, you need surgery. The bad news: anesthesia hasn't been invented. The good news: there's wine and a sturdy friend to sit on you. Roman surgical tools look like they were designed for a barbecue pit, and the sterilization method is, don't ask. you'll be lucky to keep your leg. Or your dignity. Let's start by setting the scene. You're lying on a wooden table that wobbles more than you'd like. There's straw on the floor, possibly to absorb blood, possibly because that's what they had. The medicus is sharpening a blade on a stone while humming softly. It's not clear whether it's a lullaby or just something he does when he's nervous. His assistant is pouring wine into you, not into him, though he probably wishes it was the other way around. Your pre-op consultation involved someone poking your injury with a stick and saying, You asked questions. The medicus answered with vague confidence and a shrug that said, "We'll see." There is no clipboard, no consent form, and certainly no comforting nurse with a gentle smile. Instead, your cousin Marcus has been tasked with holding you down. Marcus is strong, loyal, and recently drank most of the wine meant for you. This does not bode well. Surgical instruments are laid out on a tray. Bronze forceps, long iron probes, sharp hooks, a saw that's seen better centuries, and something that looks like a pasta fork but promises nothing good. Each tool is designed with one goal in mind: getting the job done before you lose too much blood or your patience. If you're lucky, the medicus will heat the blade in a fire first, not to sterilize it, just to cauterize the wound after he's sliced into you like a loaf of festival bread. Roman surgery was equal parts skill, speed, and audible screaming. The faster the cut, the higher the survival rate, or so they believed. There's no antiseptic, no gloves, and no one's washing their hands unless it's raining. Infection is a constant, invisible threat. Not that they understand germs yet. The general belief is that bad air, divine punishment, or your own poor attitude is to blame when wounds go bad. Still, not all Roman surgeons were butchers. Some were surprisingly skilled. Military doctors in particular had years of experience yanking arrows from limbs and stitching up gaping sword wounds. They carried their tools in leather kits, ready to perform field surgery next to a dying donkey and a panicked legionnaire. Their patients had no time to argue. They just bit down on a stick and hoped the doctor was sober. Back in your surgery chamber, which doubles as a pantry on non-surgery days, the cutting begins. The medicus makes the first incision while reciting a calming phrase like, "Hold still." You try. Marcus helps. You scream, which is expected and encouraged. Pain is a sign of vitality. Silence is worrying. One patient didn't make a sound once, and everyone assumed he was already halfway to the crossed underworld. The bleeding is immediate and dramatic. Roman surgeons had a few tricks to slow it down. Tourniquets made of leather or rope. Hot irons to sear vessels shut. Or, if things really got dicey, stuffing the wound with moss, honey, or crushed insects. Why? Because they were mildly antibacterial. Also because that's what was lying around. Once the procedure is over, meaning the offending limb, abscess, or mystery lump has been removed or drained, you are wrapped in linen bandages soaked in vinegar and prayers. You're told to rest, drink wine, and not complain too loudly, lest the gods think you're ungrateful. If your wound smells funny tomorrow, you're advised to burn sage and think positively. Recovery is less about careful monitoring, and more about fate, resilience, and whether you can bribe the house servant to change your dressing more than once a week. In the days that follow, you are watched closely for signs of improvement, infection, or demonic possession. Fever might mean your humors are rebalancing, or that you're about to lose another limb. Either way, you're told to stay cheerful. Positive energy, after all, is the Roman cure for almost everything. That and boiled cabbage leaves tied directly to the wound. And while it's easy to scoff at ancient surgery from the comfort of your sterile modern hospital room, let's not forget, some Roman surgical techniques did work. They performed trepanation, cutting into the skull, with shocking success. They removed bladder stones the size of dinner rolls. They even set bones using splints, plaster, and something suspiciously similar to duct tape. So tonight, if your knee aches or you stub your toe, be grateful. You won't need Marcus to sit on you while someone hacks away with a fire-heated spoon. You won't need to be drunk just to survive a bandage change. And you won't wake up wondering whether the medicus left a bronze probe in your chest by accident. Because Roman surgery may have been bold, bloody, and occasionally effective, but let's be honest. The scream towel was doing most of the work. Your molar is throbbing, and you can't sleep. Time to visit the tooth man, who may or may not also sell sandals. Roman dental procedures were short, loud, and performed with iron pliers. If you scream, you're considered weak. If you faint, they assume the tooth had demons. Either way, the extraction is character building. You arrive at the local medicus dentarius, which is either a clinic or the back room of a wine shop, depending on how optimistic you're feeling. There's a wooden stool, a jar of questionable herbs, and a stack of teeth in a bowl that no one has cleaned since Hadrian. A man with a thick beard and a stronger smell greets you. He's sharpening something that may once have been part of a farming tool, but now has tooth extractor carved into the handle. You sit down. It's already too late. There is no x-ray. There is no hygienist gently warning you about a little pressure. There is just the man, the tools, and your capacity for suffering. You try to explain that your tooth only hurts when you bite. He nods, gestures vaguely at your mouth, and says, "Better out than in." You don't ask what that means. You're afraid of the answer. Roman dentistry operated on a very simple principle. If something hurts in your mouth, remove it before it spreads, explodes, or turns into an omen. There is no filling. There is no root canal. There is only removal. It's a bit like dealing with a suspicious cheese. If it smells funny, throw it away and hope for the best. The tools are functional. Iron forceps shaped like miniature blacksmith tongs, hooks for loosening stubborn roots, chisels for cracking teeth into manageable chunks. There's also a flat rock in the corner, possibly for crushing herbs, possibly for kneeling on if you try to run. Everything smells faintly of vinegar, copper, and fear. You're offered a drink before the procedure. It's not water. It's very old, very strong wine, possibly vinegar by now. You drink deeply. Not enough to numb the pain, but just enough to make the shadows on the wall start whispering encouragement. The tooth man doesn't wait for the wine to kick in. He pries open your mouth, peers inside like a miner evaluating a questionable tunnel, and mutters something that sounds like, "This'll be fun." He inserts the forceps. The pressure is immediate. The pain is enthusiastic. You grip the sides of the chair, which has definitely seen better days, and try not to scream. You fail. The man nods approvingly. "Still alive," he says. "Good." He twists the pliers. There's a sound like an acorn cracking under a sandal, and suddenly your soul exits your body just long enough to file a complaint with the gods. There's no suction, no gauze, no calming music. Just blood, iron, and vibes. If the tooth comes out cleanly, you're lucky. If it shatters, he'll go back in with a hook and start fishing. At some point, someone starts chanting. You're not sure if it's you or a neighbor trying to summon the courage to go next. When it's finally over, the dentist holds up your tooth like a trophy. You're expected to admire it. It's covered in blood and mystery. He drops it into the bowl with a soft clink, hands you a rag, and suggests you rinse your mouth with warm wine and chew on garlic to ward off infection. You nod. Nodding is all you're capable of. Healing is a mixed bag. If you're fortunate, the bleeding stops after a few hours, and you only develop a mild infection. If you're less fortunate, well, let's just say Roman grave inscriptions often included lines like, "Gone too soon," because someone sneezed during dental surgery. Despite all this, Roman dental care wasn't completely barbaric. Archaeologists have found evidence of early dental fillings made with beeswax, which sounds cozy but probably wasn't. Some teeth were drilled with bow drills, using friction and bravery, and there's even evidence of gold wire used to bind loose teeth together, like a very stylish, very painful friendship bracelet for your gums. But most people didn't get fancy dental work. Most people waited until the pain was unbearable, then stumbled into a back alley, screamed into a rag, and hoped their next reincarnation came with a better jawline. Oral hygiene was primitive at best. Some used powdered charcoal and urine as toothpaste. That's not a joke. That's a documented practice. Your breath smelled like a cursed blacksmith's boot, but hey, your molars were sort of polished. So tonight, as you floss with ease, rinse with minty mouthwash, and debate whether or not you really need that checkup, remember your Roman ancestors. The ones who faced down dental horror with nothing but fermented courage and questionable pliers. They walked so you could chew. They bled so you could bite. And if you ever feel anxious about your next cleaning, just whisper to yourself, "At least I don't have to bring my own scream towel." Romans treated fevers with a variety of methods, most of which involved cold compresses, cabbage leaves, and drinking liquids until you either felt better or forgot you were alive. One popular treatment? Sitting in the shade and complaining loudly. Honestly, not the worst plan. You wake up sweating through your linen tunic. You're dizzy. Your head feels like a parade of donkeys marched across it, and your bones are auditioning for a new horror play. Congratulations, you've got a fever. Maybe it's the flu, maybe it's malaria, maybe it's divine punishment for mocking that statue of Jupiter last week. Whatever the cause, the cure is about to be rustic, herbal, and just a little bit cabbage-scented. You shuffle to the atrium, where sunlight filters gently through the roof, and several flies are holding a family reunion. A servant fans you lazily while someone brings over a bowl of cold wine, not for celebration, for hydration. Romans believed cold wine helped lower your internal heat, and honestly, after a few gulps of rough countryside plonk, you're not sure if your fever's going down or you've just stopped caring. Next, your mother, aunt, or an aggressively helpful neighbor appears with cabbage. Lots of cabbage. Cabbage is the Swiss Army knife of Roman medicine. Got a rash? Rub cabbage on it. Sore throat? Cabbage broth. Hangover? Cabbage salad. And now for your fever? Cabbage compresses fresh leaves, slapped directly onto your forehead, chest, and sometimes the soles of your feet, like a weird produce-based spa treatment. The idea is to draw out the heat, which in Roman medical terms means making you smell like yesterday's stew while hoping the gods take pity on you. There's no thermometer, no diagnosis, no assurance that this isn't just a slow spiral into delirium. There's just cabbage, and maybe a damp cloth if someone's feeling fancy. You're also encouraged to rest. Not in a cozy bed, but on a hard couch with zero cushioning. Ideally in a shaded courtyard where other family members can walk by and comment on how sick you look. Public sympathy is part of the healing process. So is theatrical moaning. The louder you groan, the more effective the treatment seems to be. Bonus points if you mutter things like, "The gods are boiling my soul," or "Tell the chickens I love them." If the fever persists, the medicus is called. He arrives, squinting at you like a suspicious melon, and quickly concludes that your humours are having an argument. Your blood is too hot, your phlegm is sulking, and your black bile is acting out. The cure? More wine, more cabbage, possibly a gentle bleeding if you seem feisty enough. You lie there as he opens a vein with the finesse of someone who once practiced on a sack of lentils. A small clay bowl is used to collect the blood, which is then studied for signs of recovery, demonic possession, or whether the doctor skipped lunch. You ask if this is necessary. He responds with a vague quote from Galen and a suggestion to eat fewer peaches. Some practitioners recommend more aggressive measures: a vinegar and mint rub-down, a full-body wrap in wet linen sheets. One deeply questionable cure involves crushing live crickets and smearing them on your temples because if the fever doesn't leave, maybe you will. Another option: soaking your feet in cold water while staring at the sundae. It's unclear whether this does anything for the fever, but it certainly distracts you. Others go the spiritual route. You're brought small clay figurines to place at the household shrine. You're told to whisper your symptoms to them so the gods can hear your suffering. You wonder if the gods accept sarcasm. You hope so. Meals are light: barley gruel, boiled greens, stale bread softened in wine. No spices, no meat, nothing exciting. The idea is to calm your body down by boring it into submission. The food is edible, technically. You chew slowly, not because you're savoring it, but because your jaw refuses to participate in this misery without protest. Days pass in a haze of cabbage, sweat, and half-remembered prayers. Eventually, your fever breaks either because the treatment worked or because your immune system simply gave up and started over. You wake up slightly less damp, slightly more alive, and craving something that doesn't crunch or smell like compost. Your recovery is marked by a small gathering, where people tell you how close to death you looked and ask whether you saw any gods. You nod wisely and say you don't remember much. This adds mystery and elevates your reputation as someone who survived something. Bonus points if you dramatically wince whenever someone says cabbage. And so, the crisis passes. The fever is gone, the cabbage is composted, and the wine is restocked. You're stronger now, wiser, a little stinkier, and forever haunted by the distant, leafy smell of Roman medicine, because in ancient Rome you didn't just sweat out a fever, you performed it, with vegetables. If none of the herbs worked, you were probably cursed. That's just science. Many Romans believed illness could be caused by an angry ghost, a jealous neighbor, or bad vibes from your wine merchant. The solution? Charms, amulets, and yelling "begone" at invisible forces while wearing a tunic inside out. You've tried everything. Cabbage compresses, wine foot baths, incense made from herbs that smell like damp tragedy, nothing's working. Your fever's hanging on, your back is twitching, and the house chicken keeps looking at you like it knows something. The neighbors are whispering. The servant is avoiding your eye. You know what this means. The gods have washed their hands of you. This is no longer a medical issue. It's supernatural. Time to call in the magus. Not a doctor. Not a priest. Something in between a spiritual technician who specializes in diagnosing curses, appeasing spirits, and shouting at your walls until the bad energy flees in terror. He arrives at your domus with a satchel full of bones, twine, and extremely confident eye contact. His robes are tattered but dramatic. His beard is patchy but intense. You feel better already, or at least too confused to focus on the headache. The first step, divination. He places a handful of beans in a circle and studies their arrangement. One rolls away under the couch. "Ah," he says gravely, "that's not good." You ask what it means. He tells you someone may have buried a curse tablet beneath your doorstep. You ask how he knows. He gestures to the bean. Enough said. In ancient Rome, the idea that disease could be caused by spiritual interference was completely normal. They had no microscopes, no germ theory, and definitely no idea that standing downstream from the bathhouse was a bad plan. So when someone got sick, really sick, they assumed it was either the wrath of the gods, the revenge of the dead, or that weird neighbor who always greets you with too much eye contact. Curses were called defictions, thin sheets of lead, inscribed with very specific, very aggressive messages. Some were buried in graveyards to call on spirits for help. Others were tossed into wells or hidden near the victim's home. A classic curse might say something like, "May Marcus be struck with boils, nightmares, and erectile confusion, until he returns my goat." You laugh. The magus does not. Your household is now being cleansed. He burns herbs, frankincense, sage, something that smells like roasted sandal, and waves a bronze mirror around the room to reflect the curse back upon itself. He makes you wear a red string tied around your wrist, a chicken bone in your belt, and a pouch of salt sewn into your tunic hem. This is not fashion, this is defense. If the illness continues, he recommends stronger measures. This includes standing at the crossroads at midnight, spinning around 3 times while shouting, "Begone," into the wind, then sleeping with a silver coin under your tongue. You hesitate. He nods. The ghosts respond to enthusiasm. Your family is supportive, but concerned. Your aunt insists on hanging garlic over every doorway. Your cousin quietly moves his bed to another house. Meanwhile, your neighbor Claudius is acting very smug lately, suspiciously smug. You remember he recently lost a bet to you over a chariot race. Could he have commissioned a curse tablet out of spite? The magus encourages this line of thinking. Jealousy poisons the air, he says, and Claudius has terrible posture. For extra protection, you acquire a few amulets, one shaped like a phallus, very Roman, very effective against the evil eye. Another carved with symbols that supposedly ward off envy, bad luck, and indigestion. You also start sleeping, with your tunic inside out and your sandals backwards, because apparently spirits are easily confused by poor fashion decisions. You start to feel slightly better. Maybe it's the rest. Maybe it's the wine. Maybe it's the placebo effect of being surrounded by enough protective charms to make a bronze statue feel safe. Regardless, your symptoms are improving, and the house feels lighter. The chicken is less judgmental. Claudius trips over a rock. Coincidence? You think not. The magus returns to perform a final ritual, burying a clay figure of your enemy upside down in the garden and whispering, "Stay gone." You nod solemnly. He gives you a thumbs up and a small bill carved into bark. You pay it, of course. Health isn't cheap, and neither is mystical peace of mind. By the time the moon is full again, you're back on your feet, smelling like herbs, dressed like a cursed scarecrow, but undeniably alive. The fever is gone. Your neighbors are wary, and you've gained a new appreciation for the delicate art of superstitious survival. Because in ancient Rome, when medicine failed, you didn't just call for help. You lit incense, buried a chicken foot, and told your ghost to get a real job. And weirdly, sometimes, it worked. Wine was the aspirin of the Roman world. Got a headache? Wine. Sore muscles? Wine. Missing leg? Definitely more wine. Roman doctors prescribed it for nearly everything, sometimes infused with herbs, sometimes with other substances. The side effects included optimism, unconsciousness, and questionable decisions. You wake up feeling like a statue fell on your head. Your back aches, your throat is dry, and your knee is still swollen from that time you tried to prove you could leap over a water jug at the tavern. The medicus arrives, takes one look at you, and writes the world's most consistent prescription. Vinum. Red if you're inflamed, white if you're pale, sweet if you're dramatic. Wine wasn't just a drink in Rome, it was an entire wellness system. In the absence of modern antibiotics, painkillers, or even the faintest idea what bacteria were, wine did the heavy lifting. It was a disinfectant, a sedative, a digestive aid, a social lubricant, and when poured into a wound, a polite suggestion for the infection to take its business elsewhere. Let's say you have a cough. The recommended treatment? Warm wine with honey and a dash of pepper. If that doesn't work, add pine resin. Still coughing? Try mixing in a bit of rabbit fat. Still? Maybe the gods are trying to tell you something. Probably to stop drinking hot rabbit wine. And wine wasn't limited to liquid consumption. Roman doctors also recommended wine poultices, bandages soaked in wine, wrapped around the chest or head depending on where it hurt. Got a swollen ankle? Wrap it in wine-soaked wool. Aching temples? Pour wine on your forehead. Your dog is limping? Splash a little wine on him too. Worst case scenario, now everyone's just drunk and confused. Some wines were spiced or mixed with herbs. These had very serious medical names and even more serious side effects. For instance, Vinum absinthiatum wine mixed with wormwood was believed to help with stomach problems. And by help, we mean blowtorch your insides while numbing you enough not to mind. There was also wine with opium, wine with myrrh, wine with garlic, and even wine with boiled eel guts, because if you're going to suffer, you might as well commit. Doctors recorded precise wine recipes in medical texts. Galen, the Roman physician whose influence spans centuries, had strong opinions on the matter. He believed wine could balance the humors, cleanse the organs, and even invigorate the spirit. Of course, Galen also thought sneezing was a sign of divine intervention, so let's take it with a pinch of sea salt. There were wines for every stage of illness. Feeling weak? A little diluted wine to build strength. Feverish? Wine cooled in a stream. Drunk slowly while you lie under a fig tree contemplating your mortality. Recovering from surgery? Wine mixed with crushed herbs to prevent the vapors. You didn't have to be conscious for it to work. In fact, consciousness was considered optional. Roman households kept different wines for different purposes. There was the good stuff for guests and weddings, and the medicinal stuff, which smelled like regret and tasted like fermented regret. Still, it worked. Or at least it made you forget what wasn't working. Children weren't exempt either. A sick child might be given wine diluted with water and herbs, because in Roman times, hydration was a team sport. Even slaves received wine as part of their rations, not out of generosity, but because it was considered healthier than untreated water, which often doubled as a home for invisible horrors and floating chunks of mystery. And in battlefield medicine, wine was your best friend. Soldiers cleaned wounds with it, drank it before amputations, and used it to sterilize tools which, by Roman standards, meant wiping them with something wet and hoping for the best. A generous gulp of wine before surgery might not have cured the pain, but it certainly gave you something else to focus on, like the ceiling spinning. Of course, over-reliance on wine led to complications. Some Romans drank so much medicine that they forgot they were supposed to be sick. Others became so fond of their treatments that they began inventing symptoms just to get another prescription. Doctor, my elbow feels introspective. Better make it 2 goblets. Even the upper class wasn't immune. Banquets often included a course where guests were served therapeutic wine between courses, just in case someone had a mild existential crisis over the flavor of pickled dormice. And if someone passed out mid-feast, well, clearly they were just overwhelmed by the healing process. Despite all this, it's hard to argue with results. Wine did kill some bacteria, it did relax muscles, and it definitely improved your mood, at least until you woke up the next morning regretting the garlic and wormwood blend that seemed like such a good idea at the time. So the next time you reach for ibuprofen, just remember your Roman ancestors. They healed with courage, creativity, and several gallons of table wine. No child-proof caps, no warning labels. Just faith, fermentation, and the occasional eel gut. Because in ancient Rome, the line between prescription and party was very, very thin. The Romans loved a good bloodletting, not because it worked, but because it felt like something was happening. If you were too hot, too angry, or just too alive, they'd happily drain a pint. It's a bit like rebooting your computer, but with a knife and a bucket. Your symptoms? Doesn't really matter. Fever? Bloodletting. Headache? Bloodletting. Rash? Chills? Nightmares? Existential dread? That's right time to open a vein and let the magic happen. Roman doctors believed that too much blood meant your humors were out of balance. Their solution? Remove some blood until you either felt better or couldn't feel anything at all. You arrive at the medicus's home, which smells faintly of vinegar, burnt sage, and mild regret. He greets you with the confidence of a man who once bled a senator for sneezing too enthusiastically. On a wooden table lie his instruments, a bronze lancet, a sharp knife, a small cup for catching blood, and a larger one just in case things go sideways. You explain your symptoms: dizziness, stomach pain, and a general feeling of doom. He nods solemnly. Classic case of overabundant sanguinity. You don't know what that means, but he starts rolling up your sleeve, so apparently neither does he. Bloodletting could be done a few ways. There was phlebotomy, cutting into a vein, usually in the arm. Then there was cupping, where heated glass or bronze cups were applied to the skin to create suction, then followed by small cuts to draw blood. The deluxe version? Using leeches, live ones, slimy, clingy, disturbingly enthusiastic about their job. Your medicus is old school. He prefers the lancet. A precise cut to the median cubital vein, which runs through the arm and has the added benefit of being hard to pronounce when you're panicking. You're told to bite down on a piece of wood, not for pain relief, just so you don't say anything unflattering about the doctor's technique. The incision is swift and suddenly warm. A deep, metallic smell fills the air. Blood trickles into the cup, and everyone watches like it's a very polite fountain. There, the medicus says. The poison is leaving. You feel faint, which he interprets as a sign it's working. No one is tracking how much blood you lose. There's no chart. No follow-up appointment. Just a vague sense that once you look a bit paler, the problem is fixed. You lie, there, woozy and slightly offended, while the doctor wipes your arm with a cloth that looks suspiciously reused. Roman physicians truly believed that bloodletting could treat everything from epilepsy to gout to excessive ambition. Too much blood made you impulsive, they said. Draining it helped restore emotional balance. Having a meltdown at a dinner party? Maybe you just needed a quick bleed between courses. It's like therapy, but with more stains. There were even rules about where to cut, depending on the illness. Got a headache? Cut the forehead. Liver problems? Try the ankle. Misbehaving uterus? Apparently a vein behind the knee. No one asked how that worked. They were too busy trying not to faint. Leeches were the gentler option. Sort of. You'd lie on a couch while a bowl of wriggling, hungry leeches was unveiled like a cursed dessert. They'd be applied to your skin, and then nature took its course. Each one could drink several times its body weight before rolling off, like a bloated grape. When done, you'd have a line of little red hickeys and the creeping realization that a parasite might have saved your life. Of course, not everyone survived bloodletting. Some bled too much. Some were too weak to begin with. Some got infections from tools cleaned with nothing but a vague hope and yesterday's wine. But if you did survive, you were seen as restored, cleansed, and ideally more polite. Famous Romans endorsed it. Galen, the empire's go-to medical authority, was a big fan of bloodletting, writing volumes on when, where, and how often to do it. His advice? Early, often, and dramatically. Senators did it to boost their clarity. Gladiators did it to calm their nerves. Emperors did it because nobody dared say no. You're patched up with a strip of linen and a word of encouragement. Don't lift anything heavier than a loaf of bread, says the medicus, who once accidentally bled his own foot. You nod, dazed, and stumble home feeling fragile, purified, and oddly proud. You've bled for your health. You've earned your soup. And so, the ritual continues. For centuries, humans believed that good health meant keeping your body in balance. And the fastest way to do that was to open the nearest faucet and let the bad vibes drain out. Was it effective? Sometimes. Was it scientific? Not even slightly. Was it dramatic? Always. Because in ancient Rome, feeling better wasn't about rest, hydration, or medicine. It was about bleeding just enough to reset the machine, then hoping no one sneezed near your open wound. It starts with a cough, then fever, then more alarmingly pustules. The Antonine Plague sweeps through Rome like a very angry god with no chill. Nobody knows what causes it, gods? Air? Bad soup? But everyone agrees. This is going to be rough. You, my friend, are right in the middle of it. The year is around 165 CE, and things are already stressful. You're still recovering from last month's gladiator riot and trying to figure out whether your neighbor's goat is cursing your crops. Then someone coughs in the marketplace. A dry, rattling sound too dramatic to ignore but too common to panic. At first, by the time the second and third neighbors start hacking, it's clear something is wrong. The fever spreads like gossip in a public bath. Suddenly, people are collapsing mid-prayer. Priests are handing out, "Please don't die," blessings like candy. And the street performer who juggled flaming figs last week is now just gone. The Antonine Plague, named later by historians with the benefit of distance and irony, is likely smallpox or measles, though the Romans wouldn't know either name. What they do know is that this disease means business. Symptoms start small: headache, sore throat, tiredness. Then come the fevers, the skin lesions, and the sense of impending doom. Rome has survived fires, wars, and Nero's singing, but this is different. Panic spreads faster than the illness. The sick are dragged to temples, wrapped in cabbage, or bled until they resemble overcooked sausages. When that doesn't work, people begin blaming everything from divine punishment to bad omens to foreigners sneezing too confidently. One man insists it started when someone dropped a cursed eel in the Tiber. Another swears it's punishment for theatre tickets being too expensive. You start showing symptoms around day 4. It begins with shivering, You try to ignore it, maybe you slept in a draft. But then comes the nausea, the chest pain, and the rash crawling up your arms like Rome's least charming accessory. Your aunt starts whispering prayers. Your uncle begins measuring your feet for sandals you may never need. This is not ideal. The medicus arrives, visibly nervous. He applies a warm poultice to your chest, rubs garlic on your forehead, and mutters something about agitated phlegm. You ask if you'll recover. He says, perhaps, if the gods allow. This is not comforting. Your household descends into chaos. Family members divide into two groups, those who tend to you lovingly, and those who pack bags and flee to the countryside. You're not offended. The countryside has fresh air and no pustules. You'd flee too, if your legs worked. Outside, the streets are quieter. Smoke curls from funeral pyres. Markets are empty. Even the cats look nervous. Officials try to maintain order, but when your tax collector coughs himself into unconsciousness mid-sentence, priorities shift. The city becomes a ghost of itself, still standing, still proud, but very, very damp with sorrow. The plague doesn't discriminate. Rich, poor, slaves, senators, everyone's sweating together now. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, and part-time stress ball, watches helplessly as his armies falter and his people die by the thousands. He writes stoic reflections in his journal, while the empire slowly melts around him. That's how bad things are. Even the philosophers are getting existential. Miraculously, you survive. Barely. After weeks of fever dreams, dry heaving, and being fed wine-soaked bread by someone who may or may not have been a priest, your fever breaks. You're weak, scarred, and smell vaguely like old basil, but alive. People treat you like a demigod. Survivors are rare and respected, even if they now twitch when someone sneezes nearby. When you finally step outside, the city feels thinner, quieter. The plague is still present, but it has slowed. Maybe it's moving on. Maybe it's just resting. Either way, the damage is done. Historians estimate 5 million people died during the Antonine Plague. Some cities lost a third of their population. Temples overflowed. Cemeteries ran out of room. Public baths became less social hub and more absolutely not. And yet, Rome endures. Somehow, new babies are born. The bakeries reopen. The actors return to the stage with jokes about how no one laughed at their plague-themed monologues. You attend a small feast celebrating not dying, and someone even gives you a cake shaped like a pustule. It's revolting. You eat too. The lesson? In Rome, sickness isn't just a part of life, it's a test of how ridiculous, resilient, and resourceful humans can be. You fought death with garlic, wine, and blind optimism, and you won. So the next time you catch a cold and reach for tissues and ibuprofen, remember, you could have been born in the 2nd century, survived pustules, and been blessed by a doctor who thought fevers were caused by angry wind. And if you were born then, congratulations. You're still here, and your rash looks almost regal. Public baths weren't just for cleaning. They were social hubs, gossip centers, and during an outbreak, excellent disease distributors. You soak in a tub with 12 strangers and 2 very nervous attendants, all while pretending the guy coughing in the corner isn't contagious. Spoiler, he is. But it's not like you can not go to the baths. You're a citizen after all. The bathhouse is where everything happens. Business deals, flirtations, philosophical debates, highly competitive loofah scrubbing. Avoiding the baths would be like skipping your weekly therapy session, gym workout, and brunch date all at once. Besides, your armpits smell like despair, and your toga has absorbed enough personal history to qualify as a historical artifact. So here you are, stepping into the Thermae Rome's favorite combination of steam, sweat, and semi-nudity. You're immediately hit with a wave of humid air and about 7 competing odors. Eucalyptus, old man, pickled feet. You try not to inhale too deeply. First stop, the apoditerium, or changing room. There's no privacy, just benches, lockers without locks, and a man named Gaius who insists on talking about his toe fungus. You disrobe, store your belongings with a teenage attendant who looks like he's already planning how to pawn your sandals, and wrap yourself in a towel that may or may not qualify as legal coverage. Next, the warm room, the tepidarium. This is your transition phase. Your pores open, your muscles sigh. You sweat just enough to feel virtuous. People lounge on stone benches, dabbing themselves with oil and pretending not to eavesdrop. In one corner, a man is telling a story about his cousin's cousin who got cured of gout by licking a statue. Everyone nods like this is both normal and medically sound. Then it's off to the caldarium, the hot room. This is the sauna meets soup phase of the ritual. The air is thick, the water hotter than a political debate in the Senate, and your skin begins to poach gently. You find a spot on the edge of the bath next to someone who immediately sneezes into the steam. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends. The illusion must be maintained. The water is communal. The hygiene? Optional. If you're lucky, the bath was cleaned recently. If not, well, consider this an ancient immune system booster. Bits of oil, skin, and hair float past you like ancient debris. Occasionally, an attendant stirs the water with a wooden paddle to make it look more intentional. You soak. You chat. You casually monitor your skin for any mysterious spots. Across the pool, a man with a suspicious cough starts talking about his upcoming dinner party. You contemplate slowly sinking under the surface to avoid conversation and possibly the airborne plague. At some point, it's time for the strigil. This is a curved metal scraper used to remove the oil, sweat, and regrets from your body. An attendant, or, if you're feeling fancy, a hired masseur slathers you in olive oil and scrapes it all off like a particularly greasy carrot. It's not painful, exactly. More like humbling. Then comes the cold plunge, the frigidarium. This is your reward for surviving the heat and human stew. You lower yourself into icy water and try not to shriek. It's shock therapy, Roman style. Your skin tightens, your lungs panic. Your soul briefly leaves your body and files a complaint with the gods. Finally, you dry off, return to the changing room, and realize your sandals are gone. Classic. You hobble home barefoot, cleaner than you've been in weeks, mildly traumatized, and possibly carrying 6 different skin infections. And yet this is normal. This is culture. Bathhouses weren't just about hygiene, they were social equalizers. Rich and poor bathed together. Philosophers debated next to bakers. Senators soaked with butchers. Disease, as it turns out, was the great unifier. During plagues, bathhouses became hotbeds of fear and denial. People whispered about symptoms. They gave each other side-eye in the steam. But still they came. Because Roman logic dictated that a clean body was a healthy body, and also, let's be honest, nobody wanted to be the guy who skipped bath day and got roasted by a toga-clad co-worker. Some emperors tried to close the baths during outbreaks. It usually didn't go well. People protested. They rioted. One guy threw a strigil at a magistrate. Because, really, what's a little smallpox between friends when your back itches and the gossip is hot? So tonight, as you take your solo shower in your sanitized bathroom with your lavender-scented soap and antibacterial hand wash, take a moment to be grateful. You're not sitting in a lukewarm human smoothie trying to ignore the sound of contagious wheezing. Because in ancient Rome, bathhouse etiquette wasn't just about manners. It was about pretending everything was fine, while soaking in a soup of strangers. While they didn't have plague masks, Roman physicians during outbreaks were still an experience. Clad in robes, muttering prayers, and doling out herbal concoctions with the enthusiasm of a sleep-deprived barista. They didn't have answers, but they had very confident eyebrows. You're burning with fever. Your pulse is doing an interpretive dance. The neighbor's already been carted off to the temple for healing, read, light chanting, and an experimental leech cocktail. And now the family has summoned a medicus pestilens, the Roman version of a plague doctor. You try to remain hopeful. You fail. He arrives on foot, robes swishing dramatically, carrying a satchel that smells like a herb garden married a wine cellar. His beard is magnificent. His shoes are, well, sandals. This is a man who deals with death, while maintaining excellent ankle ventilation. Unlike the later, more famous plague doctors of medieval Europe, those with the nightmare-inducing bird masks, your Roman plague doctor wears no disguise. No beak full of herbs. Just a determined look, several pouches of mysterious powder, and the faint smell of myrrh mixed with been inside too many sick houses. He begins his assessment with the tools of the trade. Observation and deeply personal questions. Have you been sweating at night? He asks. Do you dream of snakes? Have you been eating figs out of season? These apparently are all valid diagnostic criteria. You nod weakly, which is taken as a sign of both life and possible guilt. Next comes the examination, which involves touching your forehead, sniffing your breath, and then tasting your urine. Yes, tasting. Not a sip, more of a dab on the tongue, but still it's a level of commitment you hadn't expected from someone who hasn't blinked in 10 minutes. He nods grimly. Too sweet, he says. You resist the urge to scream. He opens his satchel. Inside, dried herbs, garlic cloves, small vials of oil, and a very sharp knife. You don't ask what the knife is for. You don't want to know. He begins mixing a concoction, muttering phrases from Galen, and possibly from whatever deity handles desperate improvisation. He hands you a warm, gritty drink that tastes like regret, pine resin, and a hint of disappointment. You drink it. What choice do you have? Plague treatment in ancient Rome was less about curing and more about surviving long enough to say, "Wow, I made it." Doctors operated with limited understanding of contagion. Germ theory was about 1,700 years away. So instead, they leaned on the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If those were out of balance, your body was basically trying to write its own tragic play. Your doctor prescribes garlic compresses, a fig-only diet, and sleeping with your feet elevated so the bad air flows out of your head. You wonder if this is science or just very elaborate guesswork. He also insists on airing out your room with incense to drive away pestilent vapors. It mostly drives away the cat. The doctor remains in your home for several hours, poking at your symptoms and taking extensive notes on a wax tablet with the air of someone who will either become very famous or very sued. He writes down things like skin tone, swampy, and breath, cursed. He also insists that music will help. A local lyre player is summoned to strum gently while you lie motionless, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this is what therapy felt like in ancient times. The lyre player plays a tune suspiciously close to Hot Cross Buns. You hallucinate slightly. It's fine. At one point, the doctor burns a handful of herbs in the corner of the room while reciting a protection prayer to Asclepius, the Roman god of healing. You appreciate the effort, even if the smoke makes your eyes water and causes the servant girl to faint. There's talk of bloodletting. You protest. He compromises by applying a leech to your ankle. The leech is named Gaius. This is apparently meant to comfort you. It doesn't. Eventually the doctor announces that you're not dead yet, and might even live. He leaves a recipe for a soup that includes lentils, onions, and crushed oyster shells. You are instructed to avoid strong emotions, loud noises, and full moons. He bows and departs, robes fluttering like a tragic curtain call. You lie back, exhausted, tasting garlic and fear. But you're still breathing. Your rash has stopped spreading, and Gaius the leech has finally detached. Progress. Because Roman plague doctors weren't miracle workers. They didn't have antibiotics, ventilators, or even soap that smelled like lavender. What they had was commitment, herbs, and sheer, unwavering confidence that shouting at your spleen might do the trick. And sometimes, somehow, it worked. Giving birth in Rome was a team sport with midwives, anxious husbands, and at least one distant relative chanting prayers. There were no epidurals, but there was plenty of olive oil. The miracle wasn't the baby. It was surviving the process. You wake up with a backache, mild nausea, and a distinct sense that something is about to happen. something involving yelling, sweating, and probably a whole lot of ancient improvisation. Congratulations. You're about to give birth in ancient Rome. Don't panic. Statistically speaking, your odds of survival hover somewhere between maybe and hope your affairs are in order. The room is bustling. You're lying on a birthing chair or, if times are tough, a wooden bench with a strategically placed hole and a lot of questionable geometry. Around you is a small army, the obstetrix, midwife, her assistants, a few extended family members offering moral support and unsolicited advice, and your husband, hovering nearby with the wide-eyed panic of a man who's about to faint or propose a name like Claudius Jr. The obstetrix is the star of the show. She's likely delivered dozens of babies, has forearms like marble columns, and speaks with the unshakable authority of someone who once delivered twins in a thunderstorm. She greets you warmly, pats your knee, and starts lubricating every surface with olive oil, your thighs, her hands, the birthing chair, probably a door hinge, for luck. Olive oil is the Roman WD-40. There's no pain relief, not unless you count herbal teas, soft chanting, or biting down on a cloth soaked in wine. Some midwives whisper spells for easier labor. Others consult astrology to determine whether Jupiter is in a helpful mood. Your cousin lights incense and mumbles a protection prayer to Juno Lucina, the goddess of childbirth. You don't know if she's listening, but you're not taking chances. Labor can last hours, sometimes days. The room cycles between hushed tension and absolute chaos. Your midwife checks your progress with the casual confidence of someone who's seen worse. She offers soothing advice. Breathe. Push. Don't curse the gods too loudly. Yes, that's normal. Probably. At some point, a servant offers broth. You throw it at the wall. This is considered a good sign. The midwife nods approvingly and pats your hand with fingers still slippery from oil and determination. If the birth goes, well, there's weeping, cheering, and a baby that looks like a damp, furious raisin. The umbilical cord is tied with thread and cut with a bronze knife that has definitely seen better days. The baby is rubbed with salt and olive oil, then wrapped in linen strips and handed to you with the solemnity of a sacred relic or at least a particularly loud vegetable. But if the birth goes badly, well, options are limited. There's no C-section, unless it's post-mortem, no incubators, no antibiotics. The midwife does what she can, adjusts the baby's position, offers more wine, whispers ancient Greek encouragements. If things get truly dire, a medicus may be called in, which is often code for panic and wild improvisation. And even after a successful birth, the danger isn't over. Infection is a constant threat. Postpartum hemorrhage can kill within hours. Newborns are fragile, fevers are deadly, and half of all babies don't survive to their 5th birthday. Romans are keenly aware of this, which is why they often don't name the baby until it's a few days old, just in case the gods change their mind. Still, if both you and your child survive the ordeal, it's a cause for celebration. Offerings are made. Thank you prayers are given to Juno Lucina and other protective deities. Neighbors visit to pinch cheeks and offer strange advice. Rub fennel on her feet for strong lungs, someone says. Name him after his grandfather or the chickens will stop laying, says another. The father? He's either outside pacing or drinking heavily in relief. He wasn't allowed in the birthing room. Roman men generally weren't, but he's expected to act impressed and supportive now. He holds the baby like it's a scroll he's not sure how to read and nods a lot. For the mother, the next few weeks are about survival and recovery. You're fed warm soups, wrapped in blankets, and told not to leave the house for several days. Neighbors drop by with charms to ward off evil spirits. One old woman insists on tying red thread around the baby's wrist to protect from the evil eye. You let her. Honestly, at this point, why not? Despite the risks, Roman women were proud of childbirth. It was a rite of passage, a source of honor, and occasionally an excuse to guilt your husband into fetching fresh fruit for the rest of the month. And for the midwife, a successful delivery was another tally on her record, and perhaps a whispered tale to share at the next bathhouse gathering. because in ancient Rome giving birth wasn't just a miracle, it was a battle. One fought with sweat, oil, and sheer stubbornness. And if you made it through, you didn't just have a baby, you had bragging rights. Sacred springs dotted the Roman world, promising healing through mineral-rich waters and divine blessings. You strip down, climb in, and try to ignore the slimy floor and the guy muttering to his knee. You emerge feeling moist, possibly better, possibly cursed. Your journey to the sacred spring began with a persistent ache in your lower back, a rash that looked increasingly like a map of the Iberian Peninsula, and a friend who insisted you needed a spiritual rinse. You pack a tunic, some stale bread, and a small statue of Asclepius for moral support, because when Roman medicine fails, and it often does, you go to the source, not a doctor, a rock that burps warm water and has divine approval. After half a day's travel down bumpy roads and across a field with suspiciously aggressive geese, you arrive at the spring. It's set in a grove of gnarled trees, where steam rises from a pool of greenish-blue water. There's a marble plaque nearby with a faded inscription, "To the God of healing, who cured my boils and my bad temper." Inspirational. The spring is busy. A few locals bathe in silence. Others chant softly. One man is smearing mud on his chest while explaining to no one in particular that this is volcanic ash, very potent, cured my cousin's lameness and his gambling problem. No one argues. That would be rude. You approach the pool cautiously. The edge is lined with moss. The water smells faintly of eggs, and there's something floating that might be a leaf or a toad who gave up. Still, you came this far. You undress, take a deep breath, and step in. Warmth, moisture, immediate regret. The floor is slimy, the water slightly too hot, and the guy muttering to his knee starts humming a dirge. But also, your back loosens. Your joints sigh. You start to believe maybe this spring does have powers. At the very least, it's doing more than the cabbage poultices back home. Roman sacred springs were part medicine, part religion, and part social experiment. People came seeking relief for everything from arthritis to heartbreak. The water was rich in minerals, sulfur, iron, calcium, all the delicious flavors of healing. Whether it worked or not depended largely on how desperate you were and how many prayers you packed. Speaking of prayers, you're expected to make an offering. Some bring coins. Others leave little clay models of the afflicted body part. There's a shelf with dozens of tiny terracotta feet, hands, livers, and one particularly distressed-looking eyeball. You offer a small wax model of your spine. It melts slightly in the heat. You take it as a good omen. Around the pool, people perform various rituals. One woman is doing laps while chanting to Hygeia, goddess of cleanliness. A man rubs goat milk on his shoulders, and then offers you a wink that feels profoundly illegal. Two older women sit on a rock gossiping about someone's cousin who claimed to be healed last week and was then immediately kicked by a mule. There's a priest in a corner alcove, draped in white and reciting verses from a scroll while holding a jar of sacred oil. He occasionally looks up, nods, and gestures at the water, like a divine DJ blessing the beat. You approach and ask what kind of ailments the spring specializes in. He squints at you and replies, "Mostly swelling and moral corruption." You soak, you sweat, you begin to smell like a salad left out in the Sunday. But you also feel floaty. Not better exactly, but looser. As if your aches have been tricked into taking a nap. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the ritual. Maybe it's the faint aroma of mint someone keeps tossing into the water like a garnish. Of course, there are risks. One man claims the spring cured his skin infection. Another now has extra skin infections. Sacred or not, communal warm water isn't always the friendliest environment for open wounds. But in the absence of antibiotics, you take your chances. At least it's not another round of boiled mouse wine. Eventually you emerge, dripping and reborn. You dry off with a questionable cloth provided by the spring attendants, who seem to operate under the belief that mildew builds character. You redress, offer one last nod to Asclepius, and limp away slightly cleaner. slightly confused, and definitely carrying a new perspective on ancient spa days. Because in Rome, healing wasn't always about medicine. Sometimes it was about belief, about showing up, soaking in a sacred soup, and trusting that the gods or the minerals would sort things out. Did it work? Who knows? But at least you didn't have to drink any rabbit fat. And that, in Roman terms, is practically a miracle. Once you died, the real drama began. Roman funerals were public spectacles, processions, musicians, hired mourners, and lots of yelling. If you were rich, you got a mask parade. If you were poor, you got buried at the edge of town and hoped the dogs stayed busy elsewhere. Let's be honest. Dying in ancient Rome was less about quietly fading into the afterlife and more about making sure everyone noticed. Your soul might be heading off to the underworld, but your body, it was about to star in its own street performance, complete with live, flute music, and someone sobbing dramatically near your feet for a small fee. The moment you took your last breath, your family sprang into action. First, your eyes were ceremonially closed, ideally by the closest relative, but sometimes by the nearest person not currently screaming. Coins were placed on your eyes or in your mouth to pay Charon, the underworld's most stubborn ferryman. This wasn't negotiable. No coin, no boat ride. Your ghost would be stuck on the riverbank like an undead hitchhiker. Next came the conclamatio. This was the loud, theatrical announcement of your death. Family members would wail your name 3 times, both to honor you and to make sure no one was napping through the drama. If no one cried hard enough, someone might even accuse the family of emotional stinginess. Nothing ruins a funeral like passive-aggressive mourning. Your body was washed, anointed with oils, and dressed in your finest toga or the cleanest one available. If you were a patrician, you'd be laid out in the atrium of your home for public viewing. If you were not, well, hopefully someone remembered to brush the dirt off your feet before wrapping you in a bedsheet and calling it a day. Then came the pompa funebri, the funeral procession. Think parade, but more weepy. Musicians led the way, followed by professional mourners who specialized in sobbing, tearing their hair out, and shouting about how amazing you were even if you were known mostly for falling asleep in the Senate. If you were really rich, you got the big show. Actors wore wax masks of your ancestors, parading through the streets to remind everyone that your family had been dramatic for generations. These imago were not subtle. They were carefully crafted to look just like great-grandpa Gaius and that one uncle who conquered something in Gaul. The message was clear. We come from important people, and we're still very loud about it. Meanwhile, the rest of the procession wound its way through the city toward your final resting place. Cremation was popular in early Rome. Your body would be burned on a pyre while mourners chanted, and your cousin accidentally set his sleeve on fire. Later on, burial became the trend, especially among Christians, who preferred to avoid the whole barbecue vibe. Your grave would be outside the city walls, because Romans believed the dead should not linger among the living, unless they were very interesting ghosts. The wealthier you were, the fancier your tomb. Mausoleums lined the roads into town, each one more elaborate than the last. If you were poor, you got a simple grave, maybe a clay pot of ashes, and a prayer that the local wildlife had better things to do. But wait, your responsibilities didn't end just because you were dead. Your family was expected to host a feast, the Silicernium, in your honor. People would gather, toast your memory, and discuss whether your will was generous or suspiciously vague. If you were especially beloved or left behind good wine, there might even be a second feast on the 9th day after your death. And that's not all. Every year your descendants would be expected to visit your grave and leave offerings: wine, food, garlands of flowers. If they forgot, well, your ghost might get bored and start knocking things over. Roman spirits were nothing if not passive-aggressive. Funeral rites were more than tradition, they were vital for ensuring your peaceful passage to the afterlife. A poorly conducted funeral could leave your soul wandering for eternity, muttering about unpaid debts and missing shoes. This is why even the poorest families scraped together enough for a proper send-off. Nobody wanted to be haunted by someone who still owed them rent. In the end, Roman funerals were equal parts grief, theatre, and legacy management. They honored the dead, terrified the living, and gave everyone something to talk about for weeks, especially if someone tripped over a mournful goat mid-procession. So if you're ever feeling unappreciated, remember, in ancient Rome, the louder your funeral, the more respected you were, and if nothing else, at least your spirit got a commute to the underworld with some coins and closure. May your name be wailed thrice, may your toga be wrinkle-free, and may your cousin not drop you en route to the pyre. Romans weren't shy about death. In fact, they decorated their homes with skulls, skeletons, and cheerful inscriptions like, "Don't forget you're going to die." It was a vibe, a little morbid, a little motivational, kind of like your high school guidance counselor. Welcome to your Roman dining room, complete with reclining couches, a mural of Bacchus getting very cozy with a wine jug, and smack in the center, a mosaic of a grinning skeleton holding a wine cup. Underneath, the inscription, Memento Mori. Translation, remember, you will die. Charming dinner conversation starter, no? But this wasn't considered grim or edgy. This was standard decor. Romans believed in confronting mortality head-on, preferably, while sipping watered-down wine and chewing on roasted dormice. To modern eyes, it might seem a bit dramatic. But for Romans, death wasn't a taboo. It was a house guest. One you didn't ignore, especially because he didn't knock before entering. The concept of memento mori was woven into everything. You'd see it on wall paintings, jewelry, bathhouse graffiti. Some people wore rings inscribed with Fata Viam Invenient. The fates will find a way. That's not just a fashion statement. That's a daily existential reminder, conveniently sized for your finger. Philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius were big on this theme. Life is fleeting, they said. You're a speck of dust on the cosmic windowsill. So don't waste your time being petty or hoarding grapes. Reflect on your mortality and make good choices, like not insulting someone who owns a lot of gladiators. Art helped drive the point home. Skulls were everywhere. Not Halloween-style plastic skulls, but lovingly carved marble ones, etched into tombs or displayed in households like ancient conversation pieces. Skeletons danced, drank, and grinned in frescoes, reminders that the line between life and death was thinner than your toga after a feast. And speaking of feasts, that's where memento mori really flourished. Wealthy Romans threw elaborate banquets, and somewhere between the oysters and the philosophical arguments about fate, someone would mention death, not to ruin the mood but to enhance it. Eat, drink, and be merry, they'd say. For tomorrow you may be trampled by a runaway chariot. Some hosts even hired entertainers dressed as personifications of death. Picture a man painted chalk white, waving a bone, reciting poetry about the futility of ambition while balancing a fruit tray. Dinner and dread in equal measure. There were also the lares and penates, household gods, that lived in little shrines near your kitchen. While not grim reapers, they were daily reminders that life was guided by unseen forces. You'd offer them food, prayers, maybe a bit of wine, because if you forgot, and then choked on a date pit, it would definitely be your fault. Death was also used as a motivational tool. Soldiers would be reminded constantly that they might not make it home. Senators were told that their power ended at the grave. Even gladiators, moments before a match, might whisper, Ave, Imperator, morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor, we who are about to die salute you, which is the ancient equivalent of clocking into a really bad shift. The funny thing is, this wasn't considered dark. It was practical, a kind of ancient emotional hygiene. If you accepted death, you lived better, you forgave faster, you cherished your friends. You didn't get too upset when your neighbor's goat destroyed your vegetable patch. You remembered. One day, the goat wins. Tombs reflected this philosophy too. Instead of gloomy mausoleums, some featured carvings of banquets or joyful reunions in the afterlife. One popular inscription read, I was not, I was, I am not, I do not care. That's not nihilism, that's peak Roman chill. Of course, not everyone was a stoic sage about it. Some Romans went the full dramatic route, building towering tombs, holding funerals that looked like parades, or composing painfully long epitaphs that basically said, "Tell everyone I was amazing." Still, the message remained. Death comes for all. You might as well be ready, and possibly wearing a nice tunic. So as you walk past that grinning skeleton mosaic in your house, maybe nod back. He's not threatening, he's just keeping you grounded. Because in a world of unpredictable politics, constant war, and deeply suspicious seafood, the one thing you could rely on was this: death is coming. Better toast it with some wine and live accordingly. Today we hang motivational quotes in our kitchens. Live, laugh, love. In Rome it was more like live, die, deal with it. Different fonts, same idea. Because if there's one thing the Romans mastered, besides aqueducts, conquest, and toga-based fashion, it was the art of remembering the end, so they could make the middle count. After burial, there was one more danger: grave robbers. The underworld wasn't safe, and neither was your jewelry. Romans tried everything to deter thieves, traps, curses, threats of haunting. It mostly worked, unless the thief was really committed. And let's be honest, some of them were very committed. Picture this: you've lived your Roman life to the fullest. You've survived questionable wine, multiple plagues, at least one goat-related incident, and now you've finally kicked the olive oil-slicked bucket. Your family mourns, a procession is held, and you're buried with a handful of coins, your best toga, and maybe a small hoard of jewelry, because you can't take it with you. Didn't quite hit the same back then. You're laid to rest in a tomb just outside the city gates because Romans like their dead to live on the suburb's edge, like ancient commuters. Your name is carved into stone, your legacy etched for eternity. And roughly 2 hours later, a guy named Publius, with a shovel and flexible morals, is lurking in the moonlight, eyeing your final resting place like it owes him money. Yes, grave robbing in ancient Rome was practically a side hustle. The poor did it for gold teeth and trinkets, the desperate did it for wine money, and the ambitious did it because cursed rings sell really well in back alleys. It was dangerous work less because of laws, and more because of what might be waiting inside. Romans were deeply superstitious. You couldn't just rob a tomb and walk away. You had to be willing to risk eternal haunting. Many tombs were marked with depictions, curse tablets left to protect the dead and punish the living. These were thin sheets of lead, inscribed with messages like, "May the thief's intestines be devoured by wolves," or, "May whoever disturbs this grave be eternally constipated and unloved." You laugh now, but in a world where people carried amulets to protect their spleens, those curses were serious business. Some tombs even included clay figurines of demons, placed strategically to spook intruders. Others had skulls with open jaws just in case anyone forgot what a dead person could look like mid-scream. Families also got creative. Some set up physical traps, loose stones, hidden pits, or even jars of broken glass buried just under the surface. If the thief didn't get cursed, they'd at least go home limping. But here's the thing. Despite the curses, the creepy dolls, and the very real risk of being smacked by a relative hiding in the bushes, tomb raiding remained a common problem, especially during hard times. Famine, war, a slightly boring week, tombs started looking a lot like savings accounts you could break into with a crowbar and some moral flexibility. And it wasn't just thieves. Sometimes doctors and magicians got in on the action. Certain body parts, yes. Those were considered useful for potions, charms, or particularly bold science experiments. Want to cure a cough? Some healer might recommend boiling a dead man's toe. Ethics were, let's say, loose. The government tried to crack down. Laws were passed, fines were issued, and one senator proposed putting bells inside tombs not to alert the living, but to terrify the dead out of staying too long. It didn't help much. If there was gold buried 6 feet under, someone would find a reason to dig it up. That said, not all tomb robbers were heartless. Some claimed to perform rescue missions, removing valuables to protect them from other thieves. Others left apologies on scraps of parchment. "Sorry, I needed it more," which, Honestly, feels like the kind of thing you'd scribble on a sticky note after stealing someone's sandwich from the office fridge. Eventually, Rome got wise. Burials became more modest. Ashes were stored in plain urns. Graves were simplified, because if your tomb looked boring, it might not get looted. And if you couldn't afford a tomb at all, you got a mass grave and a vague hope that nobody tripped over you on the way to the market. Still, the threat of grave robbers lingered like a bad smell in the afterlife. Families continued to visit regularly, not just to mourn, but to check the locks or the pile of rocks still looked undisturbed. And when they spotted signs of intrusion, out came the curses, the candles, and the stern letters to the city magistrate, demanding justice and possibly revenge. So tonight, as you curl up under your clean sheets with your valuables safely in a drawer, be thankful. Your resting place probably won't be disturbed. Your rings won't end up on a man named Sextus who lives in a barrel behind a tavern. And your eternal slumber won't be interrupted by someone muttering, "Just borrowing this," while rummaging through your ribcage. Because in ancient Rome, dying wasn't the end of your problems. It was just the start of your after-death security system. And let's be real. No skeleton wants to haunt someone over a stolen necklace. But if they take your sandals too? Now that's war. You enter a Roman apothecary, a place that smells like regret and boiled sage. Jars line the shelves with labels like cure-all and definitely not poison. You leave with a packet of something suspiciously sparkly and a new sense of impending doom. Welcome to the ancient Roman version of a pharmacy. Part spice rack, part witch's workshop, part gamble with your organs. The air is thick with smoke from burning myrrh and something that may or may not be mold. Every surface is covered in glass jars, wooden boxes, and uncomfortably stained mortars. If it's slimy, powdered, dried, or oozing, it has a home here and probably a label that says it cures gout. The apothecary himself is somewhere between a cook, a priest, and a magician with a mild god complex. He greets you with ink-stained hands, wild hair, and a confident nod that says, "Yes, I absolutely know what I'm doing," even though he just knocked over a jar labeled, "Scorpion bits, do not inhale." You tell him your symptoms: headache, stomach cramps, a rash shaped like Italy. He nods sagely and opens a scroll filled with recipes that appear to be part Latin, part guesswork. "Ah," he says, squinting at you over a pile of dried lizard tails. "Classic excess of black bile. Or maybe you angered Mercury. Let's try both." He begins mixing. A pinch of dried rose petals, a spoonful of crushed oyster shell, 2 drops of vinegar fermented in a goat bladder. He sprinkles in something purple and sparkly, for balance, and finishes with a dramatic swirl of honey. The entire process is done with such flair, you almost forget you're probably going to ingest this. This is not a place for clarity. Nothing is labeled clearly. Most remedies have names like Aqua Marcia's Blessing, Herbal Thrice Powder, or just, "Don't worry, it works." You pick up a small vial that smells like old socks and hope it's for external use. It's not. Apothecaries didn't just cater to the sick. They served the superstitious, the wealthy, and the deeply confused. Want to improve your luck? There's a powder for that. Want to seduce your neighbor's wife? There's an oil. Want to ensure your enemy breaks out in boils? Ask about the deluxe curse blend, only 10 denarii and a drop of your own blood. Sometimes they'd read your fortune in smoke patterns, just to enhance diagnosis. Other times they'd consult birds, dreams, or your toe calluses. One apothecary famously believed sneezes were divine commentary and based all prescriptions on whether your third sneeze came from the left or right nostril. And then there's the mystery powders. These are the apothecary's pride and joy, mixed in secret, stored in wax-sealed boxes, and whispered about in alleyways. Their ingredients? Unclear. Their effects? Unpredictable. Their popularity? Sky high. Because nothing says confidence like, "Take this twice daily and let the gods sort it out." Many remedies were built around simple, single ingredients like mint, willow bark, or crushed beetles. Others were extravagant cocktails involving deer antler, powdered pearl, and a few hairs from a black goat that sneezed during a full moon. These were marketed as premium options and came in pouches decorated with stern Roman faces that seemed to say, "This better work." The most famous and feared was theriac, a complex, many-ingredient blend that claimed to cure everything from snake bites to heartbreak. It included opium, cinnamon, myrrh, and sometimes bits of viper, because why not? It was stored in expensive jars and aged like wine. People lined up for it. Did it work? Occasionally. Was it also an ancient narcotic smoothie? Absolutely. Of course, side effects were a mystery. Vomiting, hallucinations, and public nudity weren't uncommon, but often dismissed as part of the healing process. If someone fainted in the street, it wasn't the apothecary's fault. It was probably bad humors, or divine punishment, or just a Thursday. Payment was flexible. You could bring coin, a favor, or even trade an old family recipe for garlic paste. One apothecary once accepted a goose and half a melon in exchange for a foot ointment. Was it fair? Who knows? The goose seemed satisfied, and if you dared question the ingredients, the apothecary would raise one brow and quote Hippocrates or Galen or something vaguely Latin-sounding until you felt ashamed and bought 2 more packets. Eventually, you leave with your remedies clutched in a wax-sealed pouch, smelling faintly of despair and lavender. The apothecary waves you off with a cheery, "If symptoms worsen, try prayer," and returns to boiling something that hisses when stirred. Because in ancient Rome, medicine wasn't about certainty, it was about hope, theatrics, and a sprinkle of powdered frog pancreas. You didn't need to know what was in it. You just had to believe it worked. And if it didn't, well, there's always wine. Roman medicine loved animals, not just for eating but for treating disease. Burnt mice for earaches, roasted lizard skin for arthritis. And if things got serious, ferret spit and owl broth. You don't know if it works, but at this point you'll try anything. Let's be honest, nothing says cutting-edge medical science like a prescription that includes toad ash and a stern warning not to let the badger lick your wound. In ancient Rome, animals weren't just farm companions, they were walking pharmacies, covered in fur, scales, or feathers, and carrying the ancient, world's version of healthcare in every gland and gooey secretion. Your journey begins, naturally, with a strange buzzing in your ear. Maybe it's an infection. Maybe it's the gods trying to contact you via your inner canal. Either way, you visit the neighborhood healer, who takes one look and says, "Classic mouse condition." You're confused, but before you can ask, he's roasting a small rodent over a flame, grinding the crisped remains into powder, and blowing it gently into your ear. It smells like guilt and burnt popcorn. You are now both alarmed and oddly optimistic. Rodents were big in Roman medicine. Mice were considered especially versatile. Burn them for earaches, boil them for sore throats, stuff them into a sock and wear it for unclear reasons. Rats had a similar reputation but were harder to catch and came with more social baggage. Still, if you needed a powerful remedy for something mysterious, and you didn't mind the side effects of extreme rodent guilt, mouse-based cures were the way to go. Then there's the lizard. Poor thing. Romans believed roasted lizard skin, when powdered and mixed with wine, could cure arthritis. And if you added a dash of saffron, it supposedly boosted memory. So not only could you walk again, but you'd also remember where you left your sandals. Bonus. Got a fever? Try owl broth. Yes, owl. The whole thing. Boiled. Possibly seasoned with bay leaves and irony. Supposedly, owls were full of mysterious nocturnal wisdom, and that extended to their therapeutic potential. The taste? Somewhere between regret and pencil shavings. But hey, no fever, right? And then we come to the ferret. Ferrets were prized for their salivary powers. Somewhere along the line, someone decided that ferret spit could treat gastrointestinal issues. The method? Hold the ferret above the patient's mouth and let nature do the rest. If that didn't work, you could try placing a live ferret on the belly and chanting softly while hoping it didn't bite. Either way, the ferret was rarely thrilled. Cats had a quieter role in medicine, mostly involving the tail. Rubbing a cat's tail on your eyes was said to cure styes. Rubbing it on other parts of the body was less effective and usually resulted in scratches. Dogs, on the other hand, were more popular. Dog fat was used in ointments, and puppies were sometimes prescribed as live comfort animals. In extreme cases, you were told to sleep with one on your chest, for healing warmth. Snakes were a mixed bag. On the one hand, Asclepius, the god of healing, famously carried a staff with a snake wrapped around it. That symbol still survives today in medicine. On the other hand, Roman remedies included everything from powdered snake fang to boiled viper meat. Want to boost fertility? Swallow dried snake heart. Want to ruin dinner? Describe that out loud. Bees were equally complicated. Honey was beloved, used in wound dressings, throat syrups, and anything that needed a sticky, antiseptic glaze. But bee stings were also considered therapeutic. If you had joint pain, a healer might encourage you to let a bee sting you right on the sore spot. Bonus pain to distract from the original pain. Genius. Then there's the hedgehog. Dry the skin, burn it, collect the ashes, and use it as a powder for treating incontinence. This is a real Roman remedy. No one knows who figured it out, or why, or what the hedgehog did to deserve it. But it's in the scrolls, possibly written next to a wine stain and a shrug. Animal-based medicine wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Each creature had a personality, a spirit, an essence. To consume or apply that essence was to borrow its strength. You weren't just drinking owl soup, you were taking on the wisdom of the owl. Or so the logic went. Did any of this actually work? Sometimes. Kind of. Maybe. If the patient recovered, the animal got the credit. If they didn't, the patient clearly hadn't believed hard enough. Or Mercury was in a bad mood. Either way, the apothecary kept the ferret. And so, you walk home from the healer clutching a pouch of beetle powder, a scroll that says, "Apply sparingly," and a vague concern that something in your bag is still twitching. Roman medicine may not have had the answers, but it did have an endless supply of animals and a willingness to experiment. Because when all else failed, you could always try the newt, or the goose, or, if things got really bad, the sacred chicken. Just don't ask what they do with the feathers. Romans believed that dying without a proper burial meant your ghost would hang around, moaning about unfinished business. These spirits were very annoying and possibly contagious. If you felt sick, maybe you forgot to light a candle for Great Uncle Gaius. In a world where superstition and daily survival went hand in hand, Roman ghosts weren't just spooky bedtime stories, they were a medical risk, a social obligation, and a recurring house guest who didn't believe in knocking. These were the lemures, restless spirits of the improperly buried, and possibly the most passive-aggressive dead people in history. Now imagine this. You wake up with a fever. Not too bad, but enough to cancel your trip to the baths, and make you stare at the ceiling wondering if this is how it ends. A neighbor pokes their head in and doesn't ask about your symptoms. No, they ask, "Did you forget your monthly offering to the spirits?" Because clearly, the logical explanation for your sore throat is that someone's great-grandmother is haunting your pancreas. See, Romans had strict rituals about death and burial. You had to be cremated or buried properly with the right prayers, coins for Charon, and maybe a small feast so your soul wouldn't wander off hungry. Miss a step? You risked becoming a ghost, or worse, hosting one. The unburied were a serious problem. Slaves who died in service, soldiers, lost in battle, or victims of plague often didn't get proper funerals. Their spirits, according to Roman belief, would become Mane's shades that lingered between worlds, bitter, lonely, and prone to rattling shutters at night. Some ghosts were quiet, others weren't. If you heard a whisper when no one was around, smelled sulfur in your atrium, or found your goat refusing to enter a room, congratulations, you had a ghost. And not the helpful Casper with a toga kind. The angry kind who left spiritual footprints on your kitchen floor and cursed your soup. To keep ghosts away, Romans had an entire calendar of rituals. The most important? Lemuria. Held in May, it was 3 days of ghost appeasement, complete with midnight chants, hand-washing, and the sacred tossing of black beans. Yes, beans. You'd walk barefoot around your house, flinging them over your shoulder and saying, "With these beans I redeem me and mine." Because if there's one thing the undead respect, it's legumes. Fail to do this, and you risk not only a haunting, but also mysterious illnesses. Ghosts were believed to cause everything from headaches to madness. The logic was simple. If the dead were unhappy, the living would suffer. Your cough? That's great. Uncle Gaius reminding you he still hasn't been buried in a spot with shade. Some families took it a step further, hiring necromancers to speak with the spirits directly. Picture this. A robed figure chanting at night, holding a chicken bone and asking the ghost to please stop cursing everyone's livestock. Did it work? Unclear, but at least someone was doing something. Of course, not all ghosts were malicious. Some were just confused. Romans believed that the soul could wander if it didn't know it was dead yet. That's where grave inscriptions came in. Many tombs featured messages like, "I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care," or the ever-popular, "Stop and have a drink in my honor." These were meant to bring closure, to let the dead know their shift was over, and they could clock out of haunting duties. But sometimes, even a good burial wasn't enough. If someone died violently or unfairly, say, poisoned by their cousin, or trampled by a senator's chariot, they might become a revenant, a ghost with a grudge, and enough dramatic flair to make your houseplants wilt. These required special handling, more beans, more chanting, and occasionally sacrificing a pig just to be safe. Public spaces weren't immune either. Certain crossroads, ruins, and even bathhouses were considered haunted hotspots. People would avoid them after dark, or enter with amulets, muttering protective prayers under their breath like ancient Roman Hail Marys. And yes, ghosts were believed to be contagious, not in a germy way, but in a spiritual sense. If you came into contact with one, say, you stepped on a cursed grave or used a haunted comb, you risked bringing that spirit home like a metaphysical bedbug. So the next time you found yourself mysteriously ill, it wasn't just the questionable fish sauce you ate last night. It was probably a long-dead relative knocking on your spiritual window, asking for closure, or maybe just attention. In modern times, we blame stress, lack of sleep, or too much screen time. In Rome, they blamed ghosts. Honestly, same energy. Because when your medical options include mouse ash and owl broth, blaming the dead starts to sound pretty reasonable. You feel sick and consult the local priest. He throws some salt, mumbles to Jupiter, and informs you that Venus is angry. Your treatment? A fast, a goat, and a vow never to skip temple again. Also, no more figs, don't ask. In ancient Rome, when you weren't sure if your headache was caused by bad wine, a vengeful neighbor, or internal organ rebellion, your first stop might not be the doctor. No, you went to the priest Rome's spiritual GP, life coach, and part-time astrologer. He didn't study anatomy, but he did know what Jupiter liked for breakfast. Close enough. The Roman priesthood wasn't exactly built for bedside manner. These were men trained in rituals, sacrifice, and deciphering omens. Medical training? None. But if your spleen was twitching or your dreams featured angry swans, the priest had opinions. Big ones, delivered with a flourish of incense and absolutely no follow-up questions. Diagnosis usually began with auspices, the sacred art of birdwatching. The priest would take you outside, scan the sky for birds, and attempt to interpret your fate based on whether a pigeon turned left or a crow sneezed. If no birds appeared, it might be because you were already doomed, or it was windy. Either way, not a great start. Next came the haruspices, a priestly class that specialized in examining animal entrails. Yes, entrails. They'd sacrifice a sheep, slice it open, and stare at its liver like it was a medical chart. Lumpy left lobe? Clearly Mars is mad. A dark spot near the gallbladder? Your neighbor hexed you. Or you just ate too many olives. Tough to say. Now, if the priest was feeling particularly theatrical, He might consult the Sibylline books, a dusty collection of prophecies only accessed during crises. He'd flip through them dramatically, murmur about fate, and then declare that your fever was part of a divine test. The cure? A public festival? Some barley cakes? And maybe, just maybe, a small animal sacrifice. Possibly yours. Let's say you're a rational Roman. You ask the priest, gently, if perhaps your sore throat could be addressed with herbs or rest. He glares at you, sprinkles more salt on the floor, and declares that Venus has been disrespected, perhaps by your romantic choices or your disgraceful dancing at last month's feast. The remedy? Abstain from figs, apologize in prayer, and light 7 candles, in reverse order, at dawn. And if you had a serious illness, the priest might recommend devotio, a vow to the gods that if they spare your life, you'll dedicate something valuable. It could be gold. It could be your best toga. It could even be a small statue carved in your likeness, dramatically weeping beside a sacred fountain, because nothing motivates the gods like tiny crying art. But the priest didn't stop there. He'd also coach your family. They had to stay ritually pure, avoid cursed objects, good luck, and maybe sleep in separate rooms for a few nights to keep the bad energy from spreading. If your cousin visited and sneezed 3 times, that was a sign the curse was leaving, or entering, or taking a quick break. Sometimes, the priest would recommend a pilgrimage. You'd drag your feverish body to a temple miles away, preferably one with healing springs, tame snakes, and a gift shop. Once there, you'd sleep on a stone floor, fasting and praying, hoping the god Asclepius showed up in your dreams to say, "Take more wine and stop stressing." Of course, the priest always had an exit strategy. If your condition improved, divine success. If you got worse, clearly you didn't pray hard enough. Or maybe your offerings were too stingy. Healing, you see, was a 2-way relationship between you, the gods, and the priest's side business in fig-related consultation. And yes, sometimes priests and doctors worked together, kind of like ancient medical tag teams. The doctor handled the leeches, while the priest managed the vibes. One treated the body, the other treated the soul, and neither had a refund policy. In the end, you left the temple lighter in coin, forbidden from eating figs, and vaguely reassured that Saturn wasn't actively trying to kill you, which in Roman terms counted as a good day. So next time you have a sore throat and reach for cough syrup, take a moment to be grateful, because once upon a time, someone stood under a fig tree, squinting at a raven, and decided that your lungs were ruled by Venus and required goat-based penance, and somehow that was the better option. Sometimes your fever wasn't a medical issue, it was divine punishment. Maybe you insulted a statue. Maybe your cousin forgot to sacrifice a chicken. Either way, it's not about medicine anymore. It's about ritual cleansing and an uncomfortable amount of chanting. Because in ancient Rome, being sick wasn't just about physical symptoms, it was about your moral performance review with the Pantheon. And spoiler alert, you probably failed. There were many gods, all with wildly different temperaments, and upsetting even one could apparently result in the full-body sweats and a rash shaped like Sicily. Let's say you wake up one morning feeling like you've been cursed. Your head is pounding, your stomach is in full rebellion, and the only thing louder than your joints is your grandmother's judgmental stare. A sensible person might consider bad oysters or a change in weather. But no, this is Rome. This is divine wrath. Your first step? Figure out which god you offended. This is less about logic and more about a cosmic blame game. Been skipping your daily prayers? That's on you, and probably why Mercury gave you a sore throat. Used your left hand to eat grapes? Vulcan might have taken that personally. Sneezed in the temple of Juno? She definitely noticed. Luckily, the local priest is here to help with no medical training, but an enthusiastic love of incantations and vague pronouncements. He listens carefully to your symptoms, then consults a chicken liver, a broken sundial, and the smell of the east wind before declaring, "The gods are displeased. Also, stop eating figs." The next step is ritual cleansing. This sounds relaxing, but in reality, It involves fasting, bathing in icy spring water, and walking barefoot in circles while chanting prayers in ancient dialects you barely understand. Your family joins in because divine punishment is often seen as contagious. If you're sick, everyone might be on the heavenly chopping block. A. Goat may be involved. It's always a goat. Sometimes you offer it. Sometimes you just stare at it while muttering apologies. If the gods are feeling fancy, you'll be instructed to sacrifice something more valuable, like a piglet or a really nice cheese wheel. The goal is to show humility, remorse, and a willingness to part with livestock. For more stubborn illnesses like prolonged coughing or mysterious skin spots, the rituals get weirder. One method involves smearing your forehead with ash from a sacred fire while reciting your family tree backwards. Another asks you to bury a coin under a fig tree while promising to never again mock Mars during sporting events. And if you were particularly unlucky, you'd be prescribed a lustratio, a full purification ceremony. This is a group effort. You're marched around the town with chanting priests, sacred fires, and possibly a flute player who's really into it. Everyone stares. Some throw flowers. Children cry. You try not to vomit on your own sandals. It's deeply spiritual. The hope is that the gods see your suffering, pity your weakness, and move on to someone else. Preferably someone richer. But if the ritual doesn't work, the problem wasn't the ceremony, it was you. Clearly you weren't sincere enough. Or maybe you forgot to include your third cousin in the offering. Divine bureaucracy is complicated. Not all gods were equally vengeful. Jupiter liked drama. Mars preferred blood. Venus was into romantic offenses. Ceres got offended if you messed with grain storage. And Neptune, for some reason, just didn't like loud splashing. It was best to cover your bases by apologizing to everyone, even minor deities you'd never heard of, just in case. Sometimes people tried to outsource the apology. You could hire a devotus, someone willing to take on your divine punishment in exchange for coin, food, or dramatic attention. They'd weep, pray, and occasionally fling themselves into rivers to show the gods you were really sorry. It was ancient Rome's version of hiring someone to take the blame for your email mistake at work. And if things got really bad, the Senate might get involved. During mass sickness or plague, they'd order public sacrifices, games, and elaborate ceremonies to win back divine favor. Basically, sorry gods, here's a whole festival. Please stop melting our citizens. So as you lie in bed, shivering and reeking of temple incense, you wonder, is this the flu? Or did you really make eye contact with that statue of Minerva for too long? It's hard to say. The gods are mysterious, and Roman medicine is more interpretive dance than science. One thing's for sure, you're not skipping temple ever again. And no more fig jokes. The figs didn't deserve that. Your wine cup is made of lead, so is your plate. And the pipes. Congratulations, you're slowly dying from your entire kitchen. Romans loved lead. It was shiny, easy to mold, and wildly toxic. But at least your plumbing is aesthetic. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how committed the Romans were to turning heavy metal into a lifestyle choice. Lead, known as plumbum in Latin, was the duct tape of the ancient world. Need to seal a water pipe? Lead. Want to sweeten your wine? Lead. Looking for fancy tableware that also slowly ruins your organs? Lead. The only thing it didn't do was scream, "Please don't ingest me." And honestly, it probably tried. Now imagine this. It's a pleasant Roman evening. The breeze smells faintly of roasted goat and incense. You recline at dinner, propped up on your elbow like a smug artichoke. Your host offers you a goblet of wine, aged in a lead-lined amphora and stirred with a lead spoon. It tastes divine. It also contains just enough neurotoxin to shave 6 months off your life expectancy. But hey, it's smooth. Why did Romans use so much lead? Because it was everywhere, and nobody told them not to. Lead was easy to mine, smelt, and shape. It didn't rust. It had a pleasing weight to it. And most importantly, it made everything look expensive. Romans loved looking expensive. If dying slowly was the price of aesthetic tableware, so be it. The real kicker? They even knew it was dangerous, kind of. Pliny the Elder, ever the party pooper, noted that lead fumes in the mines made workers sick. Vitruvius, Rome's famous architect, flat out said that water from lead pipes was unhealthy and recommended clay instead. And then everyone ignored him, because clay is ugly and lead is shiny. Let's talk about wine. Rome's favorite beverage, consumed by everyone from emperors to the guy yelling at birds in the forum. Romans used lead acetate, nicknamed sugar of lead, to sweeten sour wine. It made bad vintages drinkable, and good ones taste like nectar. Also, it slowly dismantled your kidneys. Side effects included headaches, hallucinations, chronic constipation, and sudden outbursts of poetry. Doctors of the day had no idea what was day to day going on. One minute you're a healthy patrician, the next you're trembling, confused, and blaming Mercury for stealing your thoughts. Spoiler, it wasn't Mercury. It was your cups, your pipes, and that third helping of honey dormice from a pan coated in, lead. And the plumbing. Roman aqueducts were marvels of engineering, clean, efficient, and lined with just enough lead to make a Brita filter cry. Entire cities were plumbed with lead pipes. It's actually where we get the word plumbing, because plumbum, cute, right? Until your tap water starts whispering to you. It wasn't just the elites either. The average Roman kitchen was a lead-themed death trap. Cookware, lead glazed, storage containers, lined with lead sheets. Even makeup included lead, especially the white face powders used by fashionable Roman women. You'd look flawless right up until your skin fell off. And the food? Lead leached into everything. Boiling sauces, especially acidic ones like vinegar-based reductions, practically turned into poison soup. That delicious garum fish sauce you pour over everything? It's now spiked with bonus metal. Your intestines are not impressed. But lead poisoning doesn't shout, it whispers. The symptoms are vague: fatigue, stomach pain, brain fog, mood swings, which meant that, in ancient Rome, half the Senate probably had no idea why they felt like death warmed over, but still insisted on serving dinner from a lead dish shaped like a dolphin. Even children weren't safe. Roman infants were sometimes given lead-laced teething powders. And if that's not enough to make you cry into your tunic, remember, Roman schools used lead styluses for writing. Because apparently, even learning the alphabet came with a mild neurological risk. Modern historians have debated whether lead poisoning contributed to the fall of Rome. Was it responsible for widespread fertility decline? Erratic emperors? The general vibe of, we're doomed, let's have another orgy? It's hard to say. But if you consider the fact that Caligula once declared war on the sea, it certainly doesn't not fit the theory. And yet, the Romans never stopped. They just kept sipping, soaking, and seasoning their way to early graves, because it was all just so convenient. Why worry about invisible poison when the bathhouse has underfloor heating and the vomitorium is within staggering distance? So tonight, as you sip water from your BPA-free bottle and cook in a non-toxic pan, take a moment to thank modern science. Your plumbing may clank, your wine may be boxed, and your kitchen may not be Roman villa chic, but at least your dinner won't slowly melt your brain. Because when it came to self-inflicted doom, nobody did it more elegantly or more consistently than the Romans. Cheers. Just maybe not from a lead goblet. Miraculously, you recover. Was it the herbal tea? The prayer? The mouse poultice? Nobody knows. So you leave an offering at the temple, burn a token for Mercury, and avoid any more communal bathrooms. You've survived Roman sickness. For now, in the world of ancient Rome, getting better wasn't just a matter of biology, it was a full-blown spiritual, social, and occasionally rodent-themed event. You didn't simply wake up one day and say, "Oh great, the fever's gone." No. You praised the gods, thanked your neighbors, and tried very hard not to offend anyone supernatural just in case they decided to take your health back out of spite. Let's retrace your miraculous recovery. At one point, you were wrapped in cabbage leaves, sweating out a fever, whispering apologies to Apollo, and holding a lukewarm cup of herbal wine, while a priest waved a chicken leg over your bed. You vaguely remember a ferret, Or maybe that was just a dream. Either way, you're alive. And in Rome, that calls for ceremony. First stop, the local temple. Specifically, the Temple of Asclepius, the god of healing, whose architectural aesthetic could best be described as columns, snakes, and mild anxiety. You shuffle in, still a little weak, carrying a small terracotta model of the body part that failed you. It's tradition. If your leg ached, you bring a clay leg. If it was your stomach, you bring a very unappetizing sculpture of intestines. The priests collect these like macabre trophies and place them on sacred shelves for divine review. Next, you light a votive candle, or in Roman terms, a small oil lamp, and whisper a heartfelt thanks to whichever deity you think deserves the credit. Maybe it was Mercury, messenger of the gods, who delivered your prayers on time. Maybe it was Apollo, god of healing, who was in a good mood that day. Maybe it was Fortuna, goddess of luck, who spun the cosmic wheel in your favor. Or maybe it was the household ferret, whose saliva your neighbor swore by. You also owe a thank you to your lares, the household spirits who kept watch over your home. Traditionally honored with little shrines in the corner of your atrium, these protective spirits received daily offerings of wine, grain, and the occasional cookie-shaped sacrifice. Today, you go big. A splash of your good wine, a whole handful of barley, and a whispered promise to never again complain about drafty walls or the smell of wet toga. If your recovery was particularly dramatic, say, you survived surgery without fainting, or were cured after visiting a haunted spring, you might even commission a small plaque. These were inscribed with messages like, "To Jupiter for not killing me," or "Thanks, Asclepius, the rash is gone." The more poetic among the upper class might hire a scribe to draft something in verse. You, however, go with a simple, "Still breathing. Appreciate it." There's also a social component. Roman society loves a comeback story. Friends and family come to congratulate you, often bringing small gifts, dried figs, a half-used bottle of wine, or in rare cases, another ferret. You thank them all graciously, offer leftovers from your recovery food stash, mostly broth and sorrow, and tell the story of your illness with just enough drama to impress, but not so much that they avoid you in case you're still contagious. Now, you'd think this would be the end of it, but no. Recovering from illness is also a personal turning point. You've stared into the abyss. You've argued with a priest. You've smelled like garlic and goat fat for 6 days. And now that you're well, it's time to reflect. Maybe you'll stop overindulging at feasts. Maybe you'll avoid cold public fountains in the rain. Maybe you'll finally stop eating mystery stew from street vendors. Maybe. You also make a few practical adjustments. You burn the tunic you were sweating in, respectfully, with ceremony. You throw out the healing powder that looked suspiciously like sawdust. And you definitely close the window nearest the neighbor who coughs, like he's possessed. Still, you can't help but wonder, what actually worked? Was it the prayer, the wine, the mouse poultice you don't want to think too hard about? Or maybe it was sheer Roman stubbornness, the unshakable will to keep going even when your insides are boiling and your doctor thinks you're a little too yellow. Regardless, you survived. You lived to fight another day, sneeze another sneeze, and avoid another suspiciously glowing bathhouse. So for now, you light another lamp, toss some incense into the brazier, and whisper your thanks into the quiet Roman night. Thank you, Apollo. Thank you, priest. Thank you, ferret. May we never meet again. And so, as night settles over ancient Rome, you lie there in your straw-stuffed bed alive, technically, and listen to the distant sounds of the city that refuses to rest. Somewhere, a cart rattles over cobblestones, someone still coughing outside, and a priest, 2 streets over, is muttering prayers to Apollo over what is probably just indigestion. You've made it through another Roman day without being bled dry, cursed, or accidentally pickled in wine. Congratulations. Tonight, as you drift off, take a moment to appreciate the absolute miracle of modern medicine. No leeches, no vomitoriums, no doctors prescribing pigeon soup for headaches or goat breath for gout. You can walk into a pharmacy without being handed a dead lizard and a prayer. You can sneeze without being accused of offending Mars. You can even drink water, actual clean water, without writing your will first. The Romans lived and died surrounded by mystery, faith, and a lot of very questionable hygiene. And yet somehow they endured. They built an empire while bleeding themselves on purpose, survived plagues with nothing but determination, and herbs that smelled like despair, and faced death with a shrug and a joke. There's something almost comforting in that. Humanity has always been a little ridiculous, but also impossibly stubborn. So tonight, as you tuck into your clean bed, with your temperature-controlled room and 0 snakes under the floorboards, whisper a quiet thank you to your Roman ancestors who limped, coughed, prayed, and occasionally exploded their own plumbing so you wouldn't have to. Because history may be gross, painful, and occasionally fermented, but it's also proof that people are endlessly hopeful. Sleep well, citizen of the modern world. You've survived Rome. You've earned your rest.